Greetings, mortals. Today we talk about how to create, run, and keep track of NPCs in your game. Welcome to Tabletop Sandbox, where we talk about all things TTRPG. I'm just somebody asking the question that if a posh British accent is supposed to be somehow more sophisticated and intellectual than an American accent, how come they can't pronounce R's if it's in the second half of a word? So there's a decent number of videos out on the YouTubes about how to create NPCs, and a lot of them are focused on how to make memorable NPCs or good characters for your NPCs. And while there is a little bit of that in this video, it's mostly pragmatic. This is the bare bones method that I use to create, keep track of, and run NPCs in my games. And you might be surprised to learn how simple it is. So, our first step, creating NPCs. I'm going to talk about minor and major NPCs, but really the difference between minor and major is more detail. So you just add more detail to the bones that you've created for your minor NPC. But let's dive into that. How do you create a minor NPC? I like to start with the role that I need filled. If I need an NPC, then that means they already have a position in my mind, whether it be the bartender at a tavern, or the quest giver who works for a certain guild, or just a random PC that they encounter in the wilderness. But it needs to be somebody who's going to fit that role. I figure out a very brief description for that NPC, maybe even as simple as a single adjective, like gaunt, or strong, or what's a good one? Corpulent. That's one of my favorite words. But don't overdo it, especially because as you introduce this and many other NPCs, if you try to give them all hyper levels of detail in their description, you're gonna forget it. And you don't wanna be in that position where you mention that this NPC has their special earring hanging from the right ear and your players correct you and say,
"Actually, I thought their earring was on the left ear."
And then you get mixed up, especially if that's somehow symbolic or it matters to the religion that they're a part of or something like that. You just don't want to go over the top when it comes to detail. You want to give them an impression of this NPC, not a full description. And along those lines, keep in mind that not every NPC needs to be memorable, especially minor ones like the merchant that's selling them weapons in this one town that they're probably never gonna come back to. You don't need to have developed his in-depth ideals and motivations in a 5-year plan. He can just be a guy with mutton chops. And ironically, as most GMs know, that NPC is probably gonna end up being your player's favorite. The random guy with mutton chops. Now, if it is applicable, you do want to give an NPC usually just one single concrete goal or motivation. This is something that is driving them. It might be the only thing that is driving them, at least as far as you're concerned as a DM, but it needs to be something that inspires their actions when they interact with the player characters, and it needs to be something concrete. Yes, Father? No, I'm in the middle of recording a video.
All right, well then never mind. Go back to recording a video.
Look, I told you plain as day in the text that I sent you, you are in the top 10 fathers I've ever had.
I don't believe you. All right, I gotta go now because I'm gonna cry.
I'll buy you tissues, I guess. Goodbye, Father. Where was I? So if it's applicable, if this is a little bit more than just the blades merchant with mutton chops, give the NPC a concrete motivation. This needs to be something that directly inspires or informs your decision-making when playing their role, whether it be the way that they interact with the player characters, what they're trying to get from the player characters, or it just determines their actions in the course of play. You don't want to give an NPC a vague goal like find inner peace, because as a DM, that's not really helpful to you to determining their actions and the way they speak and act around the characters. My absolute favorite tool for generating especially minor NPCs is the Universal NPC Emulator. And it does basically everything that I just told you to do for you. It gives each NPC a adjective and a descriptor, like glum evangelist or shady merchant. Then it gives you 3 motivations for that NPC that are 2 words each and are vague enough that you can basically turn them into anything that works in your story. This is something like establish order or spread lies or things like that. And they don't always make the most sense, but they give you 3 of them so you can pick and choose which ones you like, which ones make the most sense, and which ones fit within your story. I find this excellent because it doesn't just give you a set answer that's kind of one use. Instead, it gives you just 2 simple words that can inspire a lot based on the situation that this NPC finds himself in and the role that you need this NPC to play. You could need somebody to be a wilderness guide and you get shady merchant and you're like, well, they're not a merchant, they're a wilderness guide, but how does that make any sense? And then you say, okay, well, they know the wilderness really well because they're actually a smuggler moving goods through the wilderness, and they're kind of combining those 2 skill sets. And that's a character that has a little bit more depth and is more interesting than what you came up with on your own or just what the computer spit out. And that's kind of the beginning to developing a major NPC. Like I said, for a major NPC, you just take a minor NPC and start developing those things a little bit more. You can take a motivation spit out by the UNE like subvert society, and you can decide that this shady merchant wilderness guide is also an anarchist who is plotting the downfall of a local nearby government. Really, you only need to develop a little bit more than that to run an NPC, and really it shouldn't be that complicated to develop that NPC and then run them. Again, the key is to not overcomplicate things for yourself. You don't need to do much more than that. Just take those ideas, develop them a little bit, tie them into the world around your NPC, and there you have it, a major NPC. You have a name, you have their motivations, you have, who they are and a brief description, and you can use those to run your NPCs, which is the next section of this video that we are going to jump into. So for me, when I start running an NPC, the first thing that I think of is a voice, or if not like a voice, like doing a silly voice or an accent or anything like that, even just a speech pattern. Because not being able to do accents shouldn't be a barrier for you as a GM being able to voice characters. It's not about nailing this French accent perfectly, and I don't think I've ever nailed any accent perfectly. That's not the point. Some of it can be doing a silly voice that's entertaining to your players, but really what you want to do is convey the emotions or the drives or the kind of the character of the NPC as you're speaking through them. And this, you don't have to do this. I know some people run their games where they don't speak in character as their NPCs at all. Sometimes they just describe what their NPC says, or they state the words, but not in a way that is from that character's own voice. And you can run it like that, but I think it's a bit more engaging when you look your players in the eye and you talk to them as if you are the NPC speaking to them. And like I said, it could be as simple as just taking your time. This could be the voice of one of your NPCs, somebody who is calm and collected and careful with the words that they say, and it is evident in their speech. Or, it could just be somebody who has this childish aura to them where they're just kind of happy-go-lucky and, that's just the way they talk. It's not really putting on an accent or doing any major changes to the voice. I mean, this one's a little bit higher than my normal voice, but that's all you need to voice an NPC, in my humble opinion. When your characters encounter this NPC, if you didn't just create them on the fly, then look back into your notes and refresh yourself on the details of this NPC. Remind yourself of their general description and their motivation. And if you want to freestyle that description a little bit based off of the 1 or 2 words that you have on the paper, go for it. It's okay if you contradict yourself a little bit the next time you run into that NPC. Your players aren't going to care that much, but just do whatever's fun in the moment. And then as that NPC interacts with your players, play them and speak in their voice and describe their actions according to their motivations. You don't have to take all 3 that the UNE spits out, or if you're not using that tool, you don't have to come up with a whole bunch on your own. Just pick one and commit to it. Have everything they do be a reflection of their current goal. That's enough for this NPC to be memorable, or at least to successfully play their role. And speaking of role, we know what kind of role initially we want them to fill, whether it be merchant or Thieves Guild captain or something like that. But think in terms of the story that your players and you are telling together. What role within that story does this character play? Is he an older, wiser, more powerful wizard who can help your players along and provide them just a little bit of oomph, a little bit of magical aid when they would otherwise be stumped? Is it somebody that looks up to the party? A young, adoring fan, or somebody who wants to follow in their footsteps as adventurers? Is it a rival or even a tenuous ally who is working towards similar goals but is not necessarily somebody the PCs can trust? Is it a direct foil to one of your characters to kind of reveal aspects of their character that you find intriguing and you want to bring their attention to and give them an opportunity to highlight or grapple with? But one piece of advice that I would keep in mind is that if this is the first time your player characters are meeting or interacting with this NPC, no new acquaintance is a close friend or a bitter enemy. You're going to want to play that character according to their personality. If they are a shady merchant, play them shadily, suspicious, and not revealing much about themselves. If they are a friendly, open person, play them as that. And then let the way that your players interact with them determine their relationship going on from that initial meeting. You may want to track your party's reputation with that NPC, but you might just be able to remember it, or make a single note in the place where you're keeping track of your NPCs. And more on that in just a second here, because I am about to tell you how to manage your NPCs, or at least how I manage mine. But one last little comment about creating and running NPCs. Don't be afraid of a little fan service. If you just want to create a fun NPC that your players are going to love and it's just delivering exactly what you know your friends are going to enjoy playing with, don't be afraid of that. Throw that in there. It's a D&D game. It's not something super serious. You're here to have fun, so don't be afraid to have a little fun. That's what your players are here for, and that's why Boblin the Goblin will always be their favorite NPC, no matter how well you develop your villain or the ally you want to join with their party. Finally, here's how to manage your NPCs. The first piece of advice I have for you is keep them all in one place. Even if it's not their entire description, keep their names and a brief description and maybe a couple words about their motivation all in one place, whether that be a document or on one page of your notebook, or if you're running session by session. I divide up my notebook and have my NPCs listed in the upper right quarter of my notebook page. But put them in a place where you know you're going to be able to find them. And if you run into that NPC unexpectedly, you can check back and give yourself a quick reminder of who this person is, what they're like, and what they want. Within that specific doc, if you're running a long-term campaign or you just really like introducing NPCs, you might run into a problem where you have too many to keep track of and you find yourself pouring through this list that you've organized alphabetically or not at all. How I would recommend organizing those NPCs is either by location or by faction, or maybe a combination of both. If you have several NPCs that are a part of the Crimson Bickersnacks mercenary company, then put them all under the heading of the Crimson Bickersnacks. Did I say that right? Bippersnaps? something like that. But put them all under that one heading, and then you can start even with a hierarchy of the general and then his officers and then a few low-level soldiers that the party has interacted with. The other way to do it is if these NPCs are not going to be traveling around and encountering your players in multiple spots, most likely, then you can organize them by location. If these are all NPCs who live in the town of Bandersnatch, then just organize them under the heading of the town of Bandersnatch. Now, of course, these are just my suggestions and opinions, and them being objectively correct doesn't mean you have to agree with me. What I'm trying to say is do what works for you. I hope a lot of this, or at least some of it, has been helpful to you and has inspired you to make NPCs in a new way, or organize them slightly better, or run them in a way that is less stress and worry on your head. But at the end of the day, these are all our individual games, and so the best way to play them is the way that's fun for you. Now, remember to stay hydrated, mortals. Drink lots of water. And good night.